Jones Show. I am rolling solo today, but I have a ton I want to talk about. There's so much to break down. If you guys can, before we get going here, just repost, reshare the stream wherever you are watching. I already see some of our regulars in the chat, so if you're on YouTube, go ahead and post, say hi, let us know you're there, and maybe I could address some of your comments or questions as we go on here. So starting off, I want to talk about preparing to break the deal, settlements in Gaza, who owns Donald Trump, and Trump actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. That's a little bit of a joke, but I'll make it all make sense and break it down when we get there. So starting off with this Gaza peace deal, right? We have this come out, roll out, and everybody's celebrating it like the war is already over. But it seems like there's a lot left to be addressed. And I want to play this clip of Donald Trump and kind of break down some of the issues that I see here.
On Gaza, how long will it take Hamas to disarm, and can you guarantee that is going to happen?
Well, they're going to disarm, and because they said they were going to disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them.
How will you do that?
I don't have to explain that to you. But if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games, okay? Now, we did something monumental. We got the hostages back. That was the first thing we had to do. Above all else, get the hostages back. Now, they misrepresented because we were told they had 26, 24 of dead hostages, if we can use those terms. And it seems as though they don't have that because we're talking about a much lesser number. But that's a very tough subject. I want them back. That's what they said. I want them back. Also, they said they were going to disarm. And initially speaking, they needed, they did take out a couple of gangs that were very bad, very, very bad gangs, and they did take them out, and they killed a number of gang members. And that didn't bother me much, to be honest with you. That's okay. We had a couple of very bad gangs. It's no different than other countries. Like Venezuela sent their gangs into us, and we took care of those gangs. We have Washington, D.C., is one of the safest cities in the country. It was one of the worst cities in the country if you go back just a little while ago, right? Now it's safe. You can walk to work. Isn't it nice? But we have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes, you say
because
quickly.
everyone says, oh, well, they won't disarm. They will disarm. And I spoke to Hamas, and I said, you're going to disarm, right? Yes, sir, we're going to disarm. That's what they told me. They will disarm or we will disarm them. Got it?
So this is, I think, really kind of setting the stage for Israel to break the deal. Talking particularly with the disarmament, I think this is going to be the big issue. In fact, I just wrote an article for the Libertarian Institute. It was Fox News reported that they had talked to a source. They said somebody familiar with the matter who explained that once the Trump administration thought they were going to be able to get a deal, they absolutely rushed to get it done. They pushed it through. And to do that, they set aside all the other important issues. And the Qatari prime minister has said this as well. So we're getting it from the American side, from the Palestinian side, that this deal was rushed through. And in particular, they left some key issues like rebuilding Gaza, disarming Hamas, who's going to control Gaza after Hamas is gone. They set all those issues to the side, which are all the most important issues. And so I think we should really understand this deal, that it is very, very similar to the deal that was reached in January, right? Where there's this upfront phase one of the agreement that includes a ceasefire, a slight increase in the amount of aid getting into Gaza, and then a hostage and prisoner exchange, right? And it's important to note here, a lot of the Israeli captives that are coming out now should probably be called prisoners of war and not necessarily hostages, right? I think a few of them were men who were kidnapped from kibbutzes on October 7th, but a few of them were people who were taken out of tanks or who were otherwise in the IDF or an Israeli military base. And, certainly if they were members of Hamas, you wouldn't call them hostages who were held by Israel. And so in this case, I think that's a little bit accurate to phrase it that way anyways. But I think we're seeing a very similar deal here where there's really no progress made on the other issues. And we saw in March, when these talks were supposed to be going on to resolve these other issues, Israel never committed to the talks. They waited weeks to send a representative. Once they got there, they adopted hardline positions, and they kept saying, oh, you can't negotiate with Hamas. Hamas doesn't want to get a deal done. What can we do? And so I think they're going to roll out a similar excuse this time, where the major issues that need to be addressed, that Israel now has no incentive to buy into it. And so I think that's a very important piece to all of this, is that they put the most important issues on the side, and issues like disarmament uh, aren't aren't addressed yet. And this is an issue that I think is going to be a lot more sticky than Trump understands. I think it's possible, and I'm not even sure that this is confirmed, but I've seen people from Dropside News who have pretty good Palestinian sources talk about it, that Hamas is willing to agree to limits on their arsenal, but they are certainly not willing to give up their small arms. And my guess is, if you went into Tel Aviv and you're talking about Hamas disarming, you are talking about not only Hamas giving up their rockets and maybe IEDs, explosives, other kinds of heavy weapons, but also their small arms, their sniper rifles, their RPGs, their just AK-47 style rifles as well. And I don't think Hamas is going to be willing to do that. So that's one major potential problem. Now, it does seem like there was maybe some progress made on what Palestinians would be the governing coalition to kind of have handle civil matters in Gaza going forward. Hamas has been pretty open that they want to step back from that role. And so it appears there may be a council of 15 Palestinians willing to step into that role and start providing some civil administration in Gaza. But as much as Trump is talking about disarming Hamas, it is important to note that earlier this week, when Hamas was going out and fighting battles with it's the Popular Front, led by this man, Yasser Abu Shabab. And this is a group that's tied to the Islamic State, that has set up a little fiefdom in Gaza with the help of the IDF. And then there's a Dogma, I think is how you say, clan of Palestinians that also enacted a similar deal with the IDF to rule over Palestinians in a small section of Gaza. And we've seen Hamas go in and take these people out. I think what they did is offered a general amnesty, and some people didn't take it. And so there was a gun battle. 27 people at least were killed in this gun battle, most of those being members of either the Popular Front or the other Palestinian groups. I think 8 members of Hamas was killed. 1 journalist was injured. And Trump describes it here. Before, he said he approved of it, but he described of it in the remarks you just heard as Trump going in and cleaning up Gaza and taking out some very bad gangs, comparing them to the gangs that he's fighting against in Latin America, a topic that we'll certainly get to in a little bit. And so those are a couple pieces where I think that this deal is going to get hung up. Now, something that he doesn't explain in a whole lot of detail there, it's very Trumpian when he's talking about Hamas releasing the Israeli captives. They released the 20 living Israeli hostages already. And then there's, I believe, 27 other bodies of people who were kidnapped, who are taken by Hamas on October 7th, plus the body of another Israeli soldier that's been held since long before October 7th. And Hamas has so far released 12 of the deceased victims. I think Israel disputes and says one of the people that Hamas sent back was actually the body of a Palestinian, not of an Israeli captive. This has happened before. I think it's very possible that it's an innocent mistake on behalf of Hamas. I'm sure they don't have advanced DNA testing. And so if the bodies are in a, more advanced state of decomposition, or they were killed in something involving a fire, or a lot of weight falling on the bodies, it could probably be fairly difficult for Hamas to identify who is who here. And so hopefully they can rectify this mistake and get the correct body back to the Israelis. Now, a lot of people will talk about here, and this is a little bit of a side note, how cruel it is that Hamas is holding on to these bodies and using them as leverage in negotiations. Well, a part of this agreement, Israel is not only releasing 250 Hamas prisoners, so people who were supposedly convicted of killing Israelis or committing other crimes in Israel and received lifetime sentences, but also 1,700 Palestinians who were just held in administrative detention, a lot of them women and children, people kidnapped by the IDF in Gaza since October 7th. But Israel is also returning the bodies of hostage Palestinians that had died in Israeli captivity. And so Israel engages in this practice as well. It's gruesome, it's disgusting, but it's really hard to condemn one side or the other because both sides are doing it to each other. And a part of what Israel is doing right now is releasing a small number of the bodies of the Palestinians that they hold, as well as Hamas doing the same. So the Israeli defense minister says Hamas isn't releasing the bodies fast enough. This is a violation of the agreement. And Tel Aviv initially announced that they were actually going to go as far as to halve the amount of aid that they're letting into Gaza, taking it from 600 trucks a day to 300 trucks a day. My guess is that Tel Aviv got pressure from Washington here, and it had Tel Aviv call that off. Hamas was saying it was a violation of the agreement. Pretty clearly it was. And so these are kind of the places where I think this agreement is going to break down at this point. If it gets far enough, it's going to be negotiations over Hamas disarming and who controls Israel after. More immediately, Israel, I think, is going to try to capitalize on and exploit Hamas fighting against the Palestinians factions that they backed over the past 2 years during the genocide, and also this issue of Hamas releasing the captive bodies of the Palestinians. Now, some of the bodies, I believe Hamas was upfront about that they could only return maybe half of the bodies, maybe 18 to 20 of the 28 that they didn't know where all of them are. And also, you also have to consider here that some of these captives were probably held in tunnels, and we know that Israel dropped multiple bunker busting 2,500-pound bombs in a single area, knowing that this would create a poisonous gas that would go in the tunnels and suffocate all the people there. And so it's possible that, the tunnels had collapsed, and that it may just take a lot of time in order to get to these hostage bodies if Hamas even knows where they all are. So this is going to be a major issue and a potential hangup. Now, one of the reasons I'm so sure that Israel isn't going to go through, that they're going to break this deal, that we're going to see a replay of what happened earlier this year, where we had a 2-month ceasefire, 36 Israeli hostages released, a few hundred Israeli Palestinian prisoners released, is what Professor John Mearsheimer had to say to Piers Morgan on the Gaza ceasefire deal.
The Israelis are bent on destroying Hamas. And more importantly, they're bent on ethnically cleansing the Palestinians from Gaza. That's their principal goal. They have not defeated Hamas, and there's no way that they're going to end up disarming and defeating Hamas as a result of this ceasefire. It's just not going to happen, and I can explain why. And furthermore, the Israelis are not going to completely leave Gaza as long as Hamas is not defeated. And given that situation, coupled with the fact that Netanyahu and company are determined to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza, it's only a matter of time, I think, I hope I'm wrong, before the ceasefire breaks down and we're back to conflict.
So I think Professor Mearsheimer is absolutely 100% on in this clip. The only thing that I will add is not only did Israel not defeat Hamas, and I talked about this on the last episode of the show, the interview I did with Scott Horton, but just to kind of really hammer this point home, because I don't see anybody talking about it, and I think it's really, really, really important. Israel did not want to have to negotiate to get its hostages back. They didn't want to have to give up, release Palestinian prisoners in order to get Hamas to release the hostages. In fact, we know from statements from Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister at the time, Bezalel Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, the former chief of the IDF, when October 7th happened, on the day and the next day, as they're discussing how to go about it, what military objectives to set, they specifically said, we're not going to prioritize the return of the hostages, and we're not going to do a prisoner exchange. We're not going to release Palestinians in exchange for Hamas taking the captives. And this is something that Matt Blumenthal actually explained really well. And I haven't heard many people make this point. But the point of October 7th from the Hamas side was to do just this, right? They wanted to take a lot of Israeli captives and then trade them. And I think they probably took far more than they ever anticipated they would be able to take. From Hamas's perspective, October 7th was wildly successful in obtaining its objectives of taking Israeli hostages and attacking Israeli military facilities. Now, I'm not sure if the Hamas leadership really wanted its members to kill as many civilians and for its many civilians to have died on October 7th that they did. Maybe they did. I don't know. Certainly that hurt them in the PR battle. But as far as taking the hostages and things like that, their initial goal, as Matt's explained, was to facilitate a hostage exchange to get a lot of Palestinian prisoners out of Israeli jails where they just rot for years and years and years, never receive a fair trial. A lot of them are there under administrative detention. And so this is what Hamas was ultimately trying to achieve on October 7th. Now, you can't say that Hamas has necessarily won the conflict at the end of this. I mean, the Gaza Strip, which Hamas controlled, has been utterly devastated and destroyed. But this is certainly not only not defeating Hamas, but the very outcome of this conflict that Tel Aviv was trying to avoid when they started it. Now, some more evidence here that Israel does not intend to stick to this ceasefire agreement. We have this clip of Bezalel Smotrich talking about settlements in the West Bank. I believe this is an AI translation of his remarks.
There will be Jewish settlement in Gaza. Without settlement, there is nothing. First of all, the territories of the land of Israel are ours, but without settlement, they have no foothold. So we have patience, but we also have determination and faith. And with God's help, we will continue the series of victories and the great miracles that have happened to us to overcome all kinds of campaigns.
So, I don't have a whole lot to add to his remarks, but just to kind of highlight, this is the Israeli finance minister. A lot of times in U.S. mainstream media, they'll say, Bezalel Smotrich, Itamar Ben-Gvir, they represent the extremist right wing of Israel and present them as somehow like these are very marginal figures, almost like a Marjorie Taylor Greene in U.S. politics, right? Where she has a voice, she speaks out, but at the same time, she's not directing policy and doesn't have an important role. This is the equivalent of the Treasury Secretary and the Director of the FBI, right? These are major players in the Israeli government. They're not just politicians. They make political decisions for the Israeli government. And the way the Israeli government works, they are essential to holding Netanyahu's ruling coalition together, which, of course, is the only thing keeping Netanyahu out of an Israeli prison cell. And so not only do they have a lot of power to make policy, we've seen Bezalel Smotrich expand settlements across the West Bank. And he said this. He expanded a settlement in the West Bank and then said this buries the idea of a Palestinian state. And it does because it bisects the West Bank. There would never be a continuous Palestinian state, even if one was declared, right? And so Bezalel Smotrich is effectively taking the Palestinian state off the table. This is not a marginal political figure. And when he's talking about resettling Gaza, not only is he serious about it, but I think, there's a group of Israelis, who have signed up to be the first people to start to rebuild and settle the Gaza Strip. Now, I don't think they're going to necessarily go right into Gaza City, but Israel has destroyed almost all of northern Gaza. And so at this point, I think they're talking about bulldozing and then putting probably some temporary housing in initially and building permanently housing in at the end. And this plan is in play. And to rebuild Gaza, it's going to take a massive amount for the Palestinians, of concrete, of piping, of wiring, all these construction materials that for decades Israel hasn't allowed to enter Gaza, right? They had to figure out ways to make cement using recycled plastic bottles and crazy things like this in order to have new construction. After Israel bombs a structure, Palestinians go through the rubble, break out all the rebar, bend it straight so they have some to rebuild something new, right? Like, this is the situation in Gaza. And I don't see anything that makes me think that Israel not only is going to agree to a permanent ceasefire, but is going to allow the Palestinians in Gaza to have construction equipment, bulldozers, excavators, all the things that they're going to need to first clear the rubble, remove the rubble, 55 million tons of rubble, the UN estimates, in Gaza, but then to bring in the necessary construction equipment and all the materials to rebuild the strip. It's just, it's never going to happen, unfortunately. And so Smoltrich is eyeing this up. I think he has not only Netanyahu's kind of political number on this one, where he has a lot of leverage over Netanyahu, but I think this is ultimately what Netanyahu wants to do. One of the first things I said after the October 7th attack, I think Netanyahu is going to in part ethnically cleanse Gaza, because prior to Netanyahu, October 7th, Netanyahu had long touted his policy of Gaza, of propping up Hamas there, and then using Hamas as an excuse to never have to negotiate with the Palestinians on a two-state solution. And so Hamas, in part, was a political tool, an asset of Benjamin Netanyahu throughout his political career. And they had said that they control the height of the flame, that Hamas was effectively controlled enough by Israel that they cannot break out and do something like they did on October 7th. And that's why keeping Hamas in place for so long was useful. And so when October 7th happened, I think Netanyahu has to rewrite that legacy, right? He has to fix that legacy. And to do that, he has to say, oh, this is how Hamas is now a useful tool. There are excuses to go in and ethnically cleanse and just remove all the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. And that's what we've seen over the past 2 years at this point. Next up here, I want to get into, this is a little bit of a fun one. Trump talking about Miriam Adelson in Israel as he's announcing and celebrating this ceasefire deal that's likely going to be just a short-term truce.
Got 60 billion in the bank, 60 billion. And I think she's saying no more. And she loves Israel, but she loves it, and they would come in, and her husband was a very aggressive man, but I loved him. He was a very aggressive, very supportive of me. And he'd call up, can I come over and see you? I say, Sheldon, I'm the president of the United States. It doesn't work that way. He'd come in, we would do. But they were very responsible for so much, including getting me thinking about Golan Heights, which is probably one of the greatest things to ever happen to Israel. Miriam, stand up, please. She really is. I mean, she loves this country. She loves this country. Her and her husband are so incredible. We miss him so dearly. But I actually asked her, I'm going to get her in trouble with this, but I actually asked her once, I said, so Miriam, I know you love Israel. What do you love more, the United States or Israel? She refused to answer. That might mean Israel, I must say.
So there's so much here, and I could never help but mention that Miriam Adelson has $60 billion and always looks to me like a homeless woman. Like she should have a couple of shopping bags pushing a cart down a street. So there's that part of it, but also just the amount of influence that Israel has over the United States is absolutely incredible. I think the Adelsons have given Trump and the Republican Party about $450 million over the past, 10 years or so now, since Trump started running for president in 2015. And they bought the Golan Heights. They bought the U.S. moving officially recognizing the capital of Israel as Jerusalem. they effectively killed the two-state solution and took it off the table with $450 million. I mean, it's absolutely incredible that you are able to buy a president, that he's able to go to the foreign country that he's bought by, say he's bought by them, to a round of applause, and the only outrage in the United States is from the fringe of the independent media who is saying, what the hell is wrong here? Wake up, people. I mean, one of the parts about this that really upsets me the most is this is one of the worst parts about Donald Trump, because one of the reasons he was elected, particularly the first time around 2016, is Americans were tired of getting screwed. The WikiLeaks had just released how, I think it was Goldman Sachs and another financial firm had essentially picked Barack Obama's cabinet, right? Like they had said, this is who we want as Treasury Secretary, this is who we want, and this Secretary of State, and that's what Barack Obama ended up with. The people of this country knew that our politicians were bought and paid for. And Trump came down his golden escalator and stepped out of a massive skyscraper hotel with his name on the front of it and said, I can't be bought. I buy politicians. And the American people said, finally, somebody who is going to act of their own accord. Even if this man is a little bit of an idiot, even if he's kind of crazy sometimes and, has probably done some pretty nefarious things in his past, at least what he is doing because he wants to do. And here we have Donald Trump standing up and saying that that's not the case, that the Adelsons controlled him, that they would just go into the White House when they wanted, that when they brought up the Golan Heights, he said, we can recognize that for Israel. When they want to move the capital of Israel, recognize it as Jerusalem, completely scrap Oslo and all the peace process that was supposed to exist. He did it for the Adelsons. He didn't do it because he wanted to. I remember one of the positive things that people said about Trump on the campaign trail the first time around was he said, we need to, handle the situation in the Middle East from a more balanced approach. And then Sheldon Adelson went and he put his hundreds of millions of dollars and tipped the scales on his side. And now there's no longer a balanced approach in the Middle East. It's just, it's frustrating. It's disgusting. And the clowns doing it, Donald Trump and Miriam Adelson, just make it all that much more unbelievable that these two people who, again, if you see them on the street, you're kind of worried about somebody orange and a woman who looks like that. But yet they are effectively controlling the world, dictating what's happening in the Middle East, and taking the Palestinian states away from them. All right, now last up here, talking about Venezuela. This is a subject that I really want to be talking about more on the show. There's just so much big news happening with Israel and Ukraine that I haven't gotten to it enough. I want to start off by playing this clip. This is the Nobel Prize winning recipient for this year, the Venezuelan opposition leader Machado, talking with, I believe, Barry Weiss.
I dedicated this prize to the people of Venezuela and to President Trump because I think he deserves it. I think it's fair. He's the main supporter of this fight against this narco-terrorist cartel. And also because we've seen in these last months impressive results in terms of conflicts that were stopped or solved. As we speak, we see what's going on in the conflict in Gaza, which goes beyond Gaza and will impact all the Middle East. I think these are incredible achievements, and I think it is fair. And I understand a lot of people will not understand what I said, but I speak with the truth, and I believe this is the truth, and I believe the Venezuelan people share my position heartfully.
Before I respond to that clip, just want to quickly mention to everyone, my producer note for me, we are now at 105 episodes, so over 100 episodes here. I really appreciate all the support. We are able to continue to do this because so many of you are sharing the show, you're subscribing on YouTube, You're reposting it on X and doing all that stuff. You're active in the comments. So do me a favor, recommend the show to somebody. Say, hey, I enjoy this. You might too. And let's see if we could get our subscriber count up over this next week. Now, the reason I titled this section of the show, Trump won the Nobel Peace Prize, is because this is all a part of the regime change effort in Venezuela. The Trump administration is trying to gin up support for the American people to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela, the president there. And a part of that is they had to make the opposition look like angels. They had to make them look like heroes. And what better way to do that than hand them a Nobel Peace Prize? So I'm sure Trump would have preferred that the Nobel Peace Prize hang around his neck. However, when you look at what the U.S. is trying to achieve on the global stage, no matter how bad this is, one of the things that they are trying to do is regime change in Venezuela. We've heard the reporting now, even from mainstream sources, Politico, The Atlantic. They are saying that the goal in Venezuela is regime change. Now they have somebody that they could prop up. Now that they can say, oh, this should be the president of Venezuela. Look at this lady with her Nobel Peace Prize around her neck. You know she's a good person. You know she's better than Maduro. You know she should lead that country because she has a Nobel Peace Prize. And so, I mean, probably Marco Rubio celebrated this more than he would have even if Trump had won the Nobel Peace Prize, because, man, does that guy really want a regime change in Venezuela bad? And one of the reasons I'm so sure that we are going to go to war in Venezuela is all the reporting I hear right now. Marco Rubio is the most influential voice in the White House when it comes to foreign policy. At the start of the administration, I really hoped that Trump would rely on his personal envoys, Steve Witkoff, Rick Cornell, Adam Boehler to negotiate. These men aren't perfect. They're not foreign policy experts. They're not John Mearsheimer or Jeffrey Sachs, but they are absolutely better than the entrenched establishment swamp creatures like Marco Rubio and a lot of the other political appointments that Donald Trump had. And when Rubio not only became Secretary of State, but also got the title of National Security Advisor, this really bolstered his profile and made him a very influential voice in the White House. And so when you got Rubio, you don't have somebody like Pete when you got somebody like Pete Hegseth at Department of War, who's not going to stand up, who's not going to say, we can't do this. This is stupid. This is unbelievable. We're getting closer and closer to regime change. Just two last notes on that. This week, we had the Trump administration blow up another boat in the Caribbean Sea. They claim, this is a cartel smuggling drugs. No evidence provided, so who the hell knows? Probably just some innocent people out there that the Trump administration decided to blow up for propaganda, and so they could say, we killed some narco terrorists. And the other thing, and I think this is even more alarming, today it was reported that I believe yesterday, 3 B-52 bombers made like a mock bombing run at Venezuela from Louisiana. They took off, flew over the Caribbean, went right up to Venezuela's territorial waters, and then turned around. And so, like I said, this is a mock bombing run. One of these times it's not going to be a mock bombing run. It's going to be for real. And we're going to be seeing U.S. bombs and Venezuelans killed by the U.S. Very, very soon. This is going to be an absolute nightmare, an absolute catastrophe. All right, everyone. That's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Somebody in the chat said I must be heavily banned on YouTube, or shadow banned on YouTube. That's probably the case. And if you want us to help, break through the algorithm as much as we can, collect as big of an audience as we can here, I need you all to be hitting the subscribe button, to be sharing the show, to be recommending it to other people. And we will be back tomorrow at 4:45 Eastern with another episode of the show. Thanks, everyone.